Good morning. Welcome to the November 4th meeting of the Michigan State Transportation Commission. If you cannot hear me through this mask, I will lower it to speak, but if not, I will keep it on, so just let me know. We're going to shift the director's report to the informational, after the informational session, as the director has been called to a prior engagement. And we'll start with commission business, which is the 2022 proposed meeting schedule. Troy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners and Mr. Chairman, our proposed 2022 STC meeting schedule is for 4 dates. First one would be on January 20th, second one on April 21st, third one on July 21st, fourth one on October 20th. A motion is required and vote and approval by the Commission.
I would move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Support. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed or abstaining? Thank you. Next, we have the Michigan Association of Counties nomination. Troy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, due to the end of Christopher J. Bolt's tenure on the Transportation Asset Management Council, the Michigan Association of Counties would like to nominate for your consideration Kelly Jones, Director of Engineering and County Highway Engineer for the Ingham County Road Department. And a motion is required, Mr. Chairman.
Entertain a motion. So moved. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed or abstaining? Motion carries. Tony? Warranties, my least favorite topic ever here.
Is it on now? There we go. Your least favorite topic. I'll try to be very brief. Commission, thank you. I'm Tony Kratofil, the Chief Engineer and Chief Operating Officer for MDOT. And we just wanted to give you a quick update on a little change in practice that we are doing with warranties and give you a little of the background on that. So first of all, why do we even do warranties, right? So for a little over 2 decades here, it has been a legal requirement for us. It was part of legislative action that required us to do warranties starting in 1997, and there have been amendments since then. It's been a topic of great public and legislative interest for some time. And in fact, back in 2002, the Commission had established their own policy at that time for what MDOT should consider with warranties, and in this case, really looking for contractor innovation, and I think basically supporting the public sentiment that warranties would be a good way of trying to improve the quality of our products. To be clear, I think a lot of times the common view of warranties is the type of warranty you would purchase when you buy a vehicle or an appliance, that it's like a manufacturer's warranty, that it's going to be good for a couple of years. And in those situations, manufactured products are something that are entirely under the control of the manufacturer, right? They control the products that go in, they control the process by which they're built, the environment in which it's built, and even those have limitations on what can be warranted based on the use. Pavement warranties or other road construction related warranties are really not the same thing. They're really about a risk transfer of who's responsible for things like materials and workmanship or the performance of the materials in place. But there are so many other factors that play a role in that, including weather and other environmental factors, how much traffic is there, what the underlying conditions are, things that are beyond the contractor's control. So it's not necessarily a panacea. Now, I'm not saying warranties are a bad thing. It's just that there's a lot more factors, and so it's a little different than what you would expect in a manufacturer's warranty. So right now, MDOT's program has really kind of 2 main components: materials and workmanship warranties that transfers the risk for material selection and workmanship to the contractor. Typically, these are for a 3 or 5 year warranty period. And then we also have performance warranties that are really more related to our capital preventive maintenance types of projects and bridge projects, in particular the paint on bridge beams. Materials and workmanship warranties typically apply to new construction, reconstruction types of projects, major rehabilitation work, so kind of the big stuff, as well as some of our overlays for hot mix asphalt. And performance warranties, like I said, are mostly on preventive maintenance types of fixes. So these are things that are just extending the life of our pavements and are part of our overall asset management strategy, as well as I mentioned, bridge painting. Now, we've been warranted, we've been audited a number of times on the use of warranties over the years. Back in 2015, there was an audit finding that indicated that we were not consistently ensuring that contractors were completing corrective action and that we weren't always inspecting things timely and so forth. We have since made a lot of corrections to that, and our warranty program is in much better shape. In fact, there was a follow-up in 2016 that showed that we had complied with all their recommendations, and we were audited again last year, and there were no repeat findings. So that's a very positive thing to me, is that we've kind of got our house in order on this. One of the recommendations, though, from this last audit was MDOT should consider evaluating the effectiveness of warranties. Well, we tried that. We tried to do a study about 10 years ago, and the results were fairly inconclusive because there are so many other factors involved in pavement warranties. And so what we did do, and our response to that was, we don't think that's an effective use of our time and the energies of our staff that are stretched pretty thin, and really public resources that could be invested in the road system. But we did do a very high level, I'll say a rudimentary cost-benefit analysis of how things are going in the warranty program that has led us to a conclusion here that I just wanted you to be aware of. In the last 10 years, we've had almost 1,700 total warranties, and about 7% have required some sort of corrective action. That usually is not full replacement. That's usually some type of repair to get it back into the state that it should have been if there wasn't a need for corrective action. We've spent in that time period about $4.2 million in administrative costs. So this is the cost of doing the warranty inspections and staying on top of the data and so forth. And we estimate about $2.1 million in corrective actions. So in essence, we're paying twice as much for the value of the corrective actions. Now, that being said, we don't know really, and it's very hard to evaluate, how much more effort did contractors put into the quality of their workmanship and materials. Are we getting a better product? It's really hard to say. Maybe there is more benefit than that $2.1 million. It is very inconclusive. But what we did do is break this down into the different categories. And single course hot mix asphalt overlays are the vast majority of the warranties that we do, and they have the least amount of callback rate, less than 2%, which means, as one of my predecessors and member of the commission used to often say, we're not sure the juice is worth the squeeze on that element. Single course overlays are on an existing pavement that have an underlying condition that really make it hard to enforce any type of cracking or things that are not part of the contractor's control. So our proposal at this point, and is fully within state law, is that we will retain warranties where it makes sense for bridge painting, our CPM performance warranties, and for major reconstruction. But for single course overlays, the current law says we don't have to do warranties for pavement costs under $2 million. We continued to do that because we didn't want to have this mishmash of some projects have them and some don't that are of the same type of scope. But we think we've got our house in order enough that we can be pretty clean on this. And so we're going to stop doing warranties on single course overlays under $2 million. It meets statutory requirements. We think it's still consistent with commission policy. And we're going to focus our resources on making sure we continue to do timely inspections, documentation, and completion of corrective action. So that's the direction that we intend to move on starting next year, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Yes.
So I haven't had time to word this correctly, but maybe I can make my question clear. I understand why you would want to go to the less than 2 million, and that makes sense. But is there a, does MDOT keep track of, all right, let's just say that contractor X has done 10 projects over here, and historically they've ended up with issues. And so they've created problems. Maybe they weren't warranted at all or anything. but do you take that into consideration then on the next projects that particular contractor X bids on?
We don't take it into consideration on the next project per se. We have a contractor performance evaluation process. It's an imperfect process as well. It's a little bit hard to detail exactly who's responsible and everything, but we do rate contractors' performance, and we can affect their pre-qualification and how much they can bid on future work. We're actually going through a process improvement right now and an audit on that process, where it's going to be a little bit more tied to a specific project evaluation of that contractor and using contract terms to affect an outcome on that project. So we haven't worked out all the details, but that's kind of, it's less with the warranty process and more with contractor performance.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's the kind of thing we ought to hear about as a commission, and when that, Tony, when that process is complete and so on, that might warrant a presentation similar to this, just so we understand that as a commission.
I concur. Before I weigh in on it, any other questions? I think it's a matter of policy. We need to look at the commission's past policy on warranties. Anytime that administrative costs are 4.2 million and corrective actions are 2.1 million, this is not the first time we've seen that discrepancy. It seems that as long as we're following with the legislative enacted laws, that we should not have a policy that runs counterintuitive to doing what's fiscally prudent and what MDOT thinks is fiscally prudent. So perhaps perhaps Jack and Troy and myself and some others could talk about this offline and start looking at whether or not our policy needs to be updated.
We'd be happy to contribute to that. And just for your information, there does seem to be legislative interest in changing the approach a little bit on warranties as a result of the last audit. And so I'm not sure where that's going to end up, but there has been some expression of interest from several legislators as well. Okay.
Any other questions for Tony? Tony, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
Jack, Office and Commission Audits update.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
In past discussions, I have covered the nature of fraud and described the history of the Exhibit B. And today, two more topics on how OCA helps MDOT address risk. So from a perspective that there are some risks that are public information, OCA helps MDOT identify risks relative to past Auditor General reports, as Tony was just talking about. Several years ago, it was noted in the news media that many departments had a significant backlog of unresolved Auditor General audit findings. MDOT was not one of those departments. Before that list came out, MDOT and OCA were already resolving past Auditor General findings. And as a result, MDOT has continued to be among the best departments at resolving Auditor General findings. Now, resolving, what does that mean? It means one of three things. MDOT has remedied the situation was no longer applicable, or MDOT correctly persuaded the Auditor General that the issue is no longer significant. When MDOT believes it has remedied the situation, it asks OCA to look at the design and execution of the fix. If we agree that MDOT has taken appropriate and reasonable steps, we provide the appropriate conclusion. Also, our efforts often anticipate the next comment by the Auditor General. And if we identify risks that were not previously mentioned by the Auditor General, we mention them to give MDOT an opportunity to tweak its processes before the Auditor General shows up. For example, if the Auditor General reported that MDOT did not have a system for keeping track of billings to vendors, and MDOT asserted to us that they had a fix for the situation, we would determine whether the new billing system accurately kept track of the billings, the old finding, and we might compile the results of the report to determine whether MDOT timely followed up on those billings, because that would be the next logical step of the Auditor General's next audit. And two, like all institutions, whether public or private, like in the case of Amtrak, which is both, there are internal risks that are identifiable and possibly fixable. OCA doesn't claim to completely understand the ins and outs of MDOT's operational and administrative decisions. There are often nuances of which we are unaware. And by often, I mean almost always. However, despite the limited knowledge from OCA's perch as a critical thinking experts on many processes and administrative aspects of the business of government, we try to sympathize with the taxpayers when we view processes and events in our day-to-day efforts. So, on occasion, an observation or a new way of looking at things will cause us to internally brainstorm as to whether the process or event had or would have a reasonable impact on the taxpayer, or an unreasonable impact too. So, generally, someone among us will have the information nugget that we were looking for that reasonably explains why we saw what we saw. The taxpayers are unharmed. So we document that discussion, put it in our rabbit hole avoidance archive, and move on. However, the result of brainstorming, if the result of brainstorming is that we see insufficient logic for an MDOT activity, we'll ask an appropriate person at MDOT for a description or explanation. If after meeting with MDOT we believe the process might benefit from change, we will accordingly advise, suggest, or recommend that MDOT come up with a cost-effective plan. I think I've mentioned it before, but we might be able to identify that there is a problem, but the moment my office tries to come up with a fix for the problem, it is likely that we will be the problem. So we leave it to MDOT to try to figure out how to fix stuff. So, as an example, we observe something from a new perspective. We might observe that a process or a decision seems weighted towards helping MDOT's vendors, seemingly at the expense of taxpayers. Perhaps a reduction in the frequency of inspections or a process that allows a vendor from benefiting from unnecessarily subjective decisions. We would ask MDOT to weigh in and enhance OCA's understanding. The new information might lead OCA to put the topic in the rabbit hole file because we agree with MDOT. Or the new information might not be enough for OCA just to let it go, and then MDOT often agrees that OCA has introduced an interesting point that is likely worthy of resulting change. So basically, in conclusion, OCA continuously looks for opportunity to add value to MDOT's operations, and I hope the concepts I have provided today provide you with OCA's perspective and at a high level how we do what we do. Are there any questions?
Questions for our auditor? Thank you, Jack. Carol, you're up for exhibit.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can see me, but that's just something that I deal with every day. Exhibit A contains 10 contracts comprised of passenger transportation and rail. Do you have any questions on Exhibit A?
Any questions for Carol on Exhibit A? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I move approval.
We have approval and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carries. How about Exhibit A1?
Exhibit A1 contains 40 contracts, all of which will be let on November 5th, Friday, tomorrow. All have an engineer's estimate greater than $500,000 and require commission pre-approval prior to the bid letting. Do you have any questions?
Any questions? I will entertain a motion.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstaining? Motion carries. Why don't you stay up and do A3, Carol?
Exhibit A3 contains one contract. This contract has been provided to you because it only received one bidder, and it's under $500,000. Do you have any questions?
Well, thank you. Brad, Exhibit A2.
Good morning, folks. I have Exhibit A2 for your consideration and approval. We have 10 projects that require a motion, 6 trunk line, 3 locals, and 1 rail project, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I will entertain a motion.
I'll move approval.
We have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Jason, Exhibit B.
Good morning, Commission. Good morning, everyone. I got a little report for Exhibit B. MDOT projects for July, August, and September. 51 projects totaling approximately 100 million were finalized. 5 projects were more than 10% over the original contract amount, and 29 projects came in under the original contract value. Final monthly costs for MDOT projects were respectively 0.81, 0.08, and 2.03% when compared to their original contract value. Calendar year to date is averaging about 0.74% over the original contract amount, and that is the summary for MDOT jobs. For local agency projects for July, August, and September, they finalized 88 projects totaling approximately 85 million. They had 9 projects that were more than 10% over their original contract value, and 49 projects came in under original contract amount. There are 5 MDOT projects and 9 local agency projects being presented today for the commission. So,
Anyone have any questions? I have a question for you, and it may be, some of these questions may be answered by Carol or by Brad. What trends are we seeing? Are we seeing inflationary trends? Are we seeing less bidders? Are we seeing more single bidders? What do you see out there?
I think from, and I'm probably not the perfect person to comment, but I have heard that we have seen a slight uptick in some of our major item bids, steel cost, and some other of our primary items. I'm not as educated on our number of bidders. I don't know if we have that right now. But
Maybe Carol can address that, or Brad.
We're going to talk a little bit about it in the presentation.
Okay. All right, as long as we're talking about those type of trends.
And there's also in the presentation that Tony mentioned, there's a slide in there for your information on historic MDOT performance on contracts, kind of a summary for Exhibit B for the last 8 years, if I remember, so that's coming in that presentation.
Well, thank you for the report.
Thank you.
We're gonna have the director's agenda. Carol?
The October 21st, 2021 Director's Agenda contained one memorandum of understanding between MDOT and the Wayne County Airport Authority to provide lawn mowing services. Any questions for me on that one?
No questions? Continue on to State Ad Board.
The October 26, 2021 State Ad Board Agenda contained 48 contracts, the majority of which were bid letting items, a couple purchasing items, and consultant contract items as well. Any questions?
No questions? Thank you again.
Thank you.
We have come to our presentations. The monitoring and managing construction costs.
Thank you. Well, good morning again, Commissioners. At the last Commission meeting in July, there was some discussion about cost escalation and concerns about that and just how we manage construction costs. And so we've prepared a presentation today to kind of address some of those issues for you. Got a number of presenters here today that are going to help me with this. Actually, I'm just really introducing it and will help field some questions. But there's a number of different aspects that we want to address. First of all is a research project that we've undertaken in cooperation with Western Michigan University on developing a Michigan-specific highway construction cost index. This is really the crux of understanding what trends are we seeing in prices for construction costs. The second piece, though, that we want to address is monitoring and managing bid letting. So this is kind of the Exhibit A2 that you normally see. It's actually less a measure of what's happening with bid costs and how effective is MDOT in keeping up with that and how good our estimates are, how good our evaluation of risk is compared to what contractors see and how they bid our projects. The third piece we want to address that kind of goes along with cost escalation, there were some questions last meeting about cost escalation clauses and how we do price adjustments, which we really don't do in Michigan, but other states do. And we just want to share a little bit of that with you. We're not advocating any change in our practices here today. In fact, we think the way we manage this is very effective, but we want to at least share with you what other industry practices are around the country. And then lastly, we want to touch a little bit, all of this is predicated on understanding project risk and how we manage that, and other ways that we can manage that using innovative contracting that we do, but we could leverage differently. But with every different way of managing risk, there's rewards and there's costs associated with that, and so it's not like there's a perfect answer or anything like that. So today, starting off, I want to introduce Dr. Hee-Soo Liu and his team from Western Michigan University to share a little bit about what they've done with the developing a Michigan-specific construction cost index for us. So, Dr. Liu.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hee-Soo Liu. I'm an assistant professor of construction engineering at Western Michigan University. Today, with me, I have Dr. Valerian at the back. He is professor of transportation engineering at Western. So in this presentation, basically, I'm going to show you the Michigan Highway Construction Cost Index. So for this research project, we calculated the historical price index value for Michigan State. And in this presentation, I will show you first the historical value for the Michigan Highway Price Cost Index and some findings. Also, we did the forecast for the next 5 years. So I'm also going to show you the predicted value for the Highway Construction Cost Price Index for Michigan. Before that, a very brief introduction about the Michigan Highway Construction Cost Index. Basically, this index is going to measure the price changes of construction pay items over time. So we were looking at the price changes of construction pay items rather than a specific construction material. Thank you. Okay. So we were looking at the price changes for the construction pay items instead of the price changes for a specific material, labor, or equipment. So we calculated 3 types of price index, including the index value for the whole state, and the category index, as well as the index value for each MDOT region. So this figure shows the statewide index for Michigan. In the calculation, we take 2010 as the base year, and that means the index value for 2010 is 1. And by the end of 2020, so the index value was increased to 1.44. That means over the last 10 years, the price in Michigan was increased about 44%. We also compared the Michigan index value with the peer states, as shown in the map here. And also we compare Michigan index value with the national index value from the Federal Highway Administration Office. So in this figure, it shows the 3 index trends. So the blue one here is the national index value, and the orange here is for Michigan. The gray is the average value for the peer states. So if we look at the trends, so basically all the three indexes, they has a similar trends over the past 10 years. That means Michigan, we had a similar construction market condition with the peer states. We also convert the index value for the past 10 years into the annual growth rate. So over the past 10 years, so the national index was increased by 3.3% every year. The Michigan index was increased about 4.3% every year. So the peer states is about 5.5%. Another comparison we did here is we compare the Michigan index value with some major construction material index from the labor of statistics. For example, in this figure, the orange line represents the index trends for Michigan. The blue dashed line represents the index for asphalt, and the red one here is for the structural metal. So the green and the purple, they are the indexes for the concrete. So over the past 10 years, Michigan index has similar spikes with the asphalt index. So in addition to the statewide index, we calculated the index value for different construction work category. So basically, we group all the pay items into 10 different work categories. For example, we have earthwork, we have the asphalt payments, and we have structural concrete work, etc. And this figure, the orange line, is the statewide index trends. And the category index was plotted with different color. So for example, if you look at the earthwork, so over the past 10 years, so the earthwork index was higher than the statewide index. Basically, that means the earthwork, the price was increased more compared with other work. And the earthwork index was driving up the whole state's index value. And for the payments, asphalt payments, so in the past 10 years, so asphalt payments has the similar spikes at the same period, same quarter, with the statewide index. And also, if you look at the cost percentage for each work category, so asphalt payments accounted for like 42.4% for the past 10 years. So any price changes to the asphalt payment actually is going to make a significant impact to the statewide index value. So asphalt payment actually is controlling the statewide index. So here it shows the index value for each MDOT region. So the orange line is still for the statewide index, and the regional index are plotted with different color. So for example, if you look at the bottom, we have a university, and the metro region. So for the 10 years period, so university region and the metro region, their index value was higher for about 7 or 8 years than the statewide index. So that means university region and the metro region, their price was increased more compared with the other regions, other 5 regions. So based on the historical index value, we did the forecast. This figure shows the forecasted index value for the next 5 years. So all the predicted value is showed on the right side of this vertical right line. So basically for the next 5 years, by the end of 2025, so the index will be increased to 1.27. In this prediction, so we didn't consider the pandemic because we finished the projects before June of 2020. So at that time, we do not have sufficient data about cost data about the pandemic. We also convert the prediction into the annual growth rate. So for the next 5 years, So at average, the index will be increased by 3.83% every year. So another analysis we did here is we are trying to analyze how the labor cost is going to affect the whole construction cost for Michigan. So we collect the labor price data for the periods of 2015 to 2019 and calculated the labor index for this period. So this figure shows the comparison between the labor index with the statewide index for Michigan. So the orange line here is the statewide index. The blue line here is for the labor index. So basically, for this period, the labor index is, for most of the time, is under the statewide index. As average, the labor index is about 1.008, so the statewide index is about 1.04. That means that the labor cost actually is not a significant driver for the construction cost increase in Michigan. It's not a significant driver for the statewide index increase. So as I mentioned, we didn't consider the pandemic in the prediction for the index value, but the pandemic will increase the construction cost. So for example, because of the pandemic, so the labor cost could be increased as we have the labor shortage. And in terms of material, because of the supply chain and the transportation problems, the material cost could be increased. And lastly, the federal government's infrastructure spending bill will further stimulate more demands, but with limited supplies in terms of material and labor, so it could further increase the construction cost for Michigan. Thank you. So if you have any question, I would be happy to answer.
I have a question, Doctor. On the labor trends, if it doesn't show that it's going up much, but the labor cost and wages are trending up, I'm perplexed with the labor shortage that's not going up more. How are you coming up with that?
The labor index here is only like from 2015 to 2019.
Okay.
So we do not have the data for the past 3 years.
Got you.
So the
Okay.
labor shortage probably is mainly, from 2020 or 2021. Yeah.
So really, that could influence this report
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Do you have
again,
any idea, without the kind of the data, how much that could increase it?
now we cannot make any conclusion on this question, but probably we have to look at more data about after the pandemic, right? So we had to collect the data from 2020 until now to do the further analysis on this part.
Right.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So I assume that this will eventually roll into how MDOT does estimating and will refine the estimating process?
Yes. Yeah.
Dr. Liu just developed the tool for us, but yes, that's the intent, is that this will help influence how we do both estimating for programming the overall budgets of projects, but also how we deal with estimating at kind of the final stage before bidding. Our past practice was to kind of use the national number, right? And it was just kind of a broad average, and turns out it was not that bad, but with more rapid fluctuations and things happening in the supply chain that we're seeing right now, this will give us a much more refined and Michigan-specific solution to that. If I could go back to Commissioner Zirup's question too, labor accounts for about 15% of construction costs. So it certainly impacts things, but maybe not as much as you would see in other sectors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add that this was, not only did MDOT go out and do this on their own, but this was also done because of a call from the legislature. This was one thing that we persistently heard from them, that they requested of the department, was to have cost data like this. And so after working with Chairman Barrett of the Senate Transportation Committee, we went out and did this on our own administratively without legislation, but as one part of a direct result from those calls from the legislature. So that shows the continued cooperation and collaboration that the department has with the legislature, and here's the calls that they do request of us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. So the next, again, this is kind of the real piece that gives us a look at what's happening with escalation of costs in our program. But as you asked Commissioner Johnson, this is really to help feed the process that then follows, right? So the next piece of this is how we monitor how that plays out in the bidding of our projects. And so I'm going to ask Brad Wieferich to come up, and Kristen wasn't able to be here today, but to just talk a little bit about how we monitor this now as we're bidding projects.
So I am not Kristen Schuster, but I used to be the engineer of design, so hopefully that qualifies me to give this presentation. Just going to show you a few slides on some graphs and some reports that we use to kind of look at things from a programmatic level. This isn't down to the unit cost and to the project level, but really how are we doing programmatically? I will tell you in the last 5-6 years, our program's grown immensely. You know, we got a revenue enhancement late 2015 that's fully kicked in fiscal year 21, and obviously rebuilding Michigan as well. So we know that without expanding resources, we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on our program. This just kind of shows you, looking back at last fiscal year 21 from October to September, how our bids were coming in. And the blue line is what was programmed, not necessarily the engineer's estimate, but this was the original programmed, or the programmed amount at time of bidding. And the orange line is the cumulative dollars of low bids. The bars that you see are the number blue, the number of program projects that were to be let, and then the beige color, orange color is what was actually let. Kind of hard to see maybe in that table, but it's a running total of the engineer's estimate versus the low bids. So we're kind of looking at that really high level to say, are bids coming in at about what we are expecting? And you can see, and I can see that at the end of the year, I think the number's negative 1.7. Am I reading that right? So we were within a couple of percent at the program level from our engineers' estimates to the low bid. Pretty good. Obviously better to be over than under. I will tell you that on a project basis, we do try to shoot to get into that plus minus 10% range. That helps us balance things out overall. But this is just a look at what happened last year. As for what's coming up, in this year, we're tracking things a little bit differently. You'll see this is the targeted letting window. Whereas a couple of years ago, our intention was to get the bulk of our program. We had a measure. We wanted to get 90% of our program let in the first 2 quarters of a fiscal year. That meant October to March. We've shifted that. Well, the reason we did that is we wanted things out and let and on the street before construction began. With the growing program, we decided to move that farther forward even. So instead of October to March really being our focus target window, now it's July to December. We want to do that in order to get the projects out as early as possible so that our contractors that are bidding on them have the greatest flexibility, one, for procurement and getting themselves ready, but also to provide as much time on the back end for the actual construction work. So essentially what we've done is kind of shifted things forward, and we're tracking this every month as well, kind of looking at what's programmed versus where we really are. This does show a significant overage in October. This slide does. However, this was done before we had actually rejected a couple of bids that came in very high. So this needs to be updated. It is not 20-some% over in October. It's actually in the single digits someplace. This next slide is kind of a heat map that just shows you the dollar amounts per letting and what's programmed. Red is obviously bigger dollars, any letting over 100 million. When I was engineer of design, if we had a single letting over $100 million, that was huge. You know, I think our whole program was probably about 750 million. Now we are regularly, obviously, having well over $100 million lettings, looking at close to $2 billion a year. But what you can see, obviously, with the red on the left side, those are the big lettings. Those are August to December every year. You will see bumps, you know, especially this year, because we're in that transition phase of moving our letting target window out. So, plus some of these later ones that you'll see in like May and June, those are often multiple year projects. So it's not like we're going to let a $100 million job in May and expect it to be done that year. Some of those could be design build that need design time on the lead and constructed over the next year or two. But again, this is just a visual to show you, you know, where the bulk of our program is going out year over year in our 5-year program. This last one's kind of spiky, but maybe being an engineer, I like it because it shows me a picture. It's almost the same picture as this, but it's just per letting. And I can see the dollar amount in red is the lines, and the blue are the number of projects. So again, you can kind of see where those higher points are going to be that July to December time frame. We do look to flatten these out just a little bit. You can see out in 2023, we have a very huge August letting. A lot of times those will be broken into multiple lettings per month. We'll have one usually the first Friday is our normal letting. Couple weeks later, we'll often have a second letting just to kind of balance things out. So this is just another visual look at the dollar amounts and where we are. I will point out that by the time we get out to 2025 and 2026, you'll see that the spikes are much lower. Rebuilding Michigan will be out and on the street being constructed, and we'll be back to our previous program dollar amounts, which is probably a little less than or about $1 billion, as opposed to the $2 billion-ish a year that we're looking at now. And then the last slide, I just want to let you know another thing that we're doing to try to manage this at the program level, we're calling integrated program support. And what we're doing is getting 3 contracts in place. One is on the construction end of things to really look at schedules, constructability, you know, how and when can these really be built. We have one that's titled PM support, that's design project manager support, looking at the actual development schedules from the time that we do a scope verification and start design to finishing the design, to getting it advertised, let, and award, and really looking at how we can best align our resources in the development process. So we have a design piece, we have a construction piece, and then we have this integrated program management where we have another entity that's going to take this information and help us optimize. You know, I showed you this. It's kind of spiky and not a lot of detail other than number of projects and dollars. But we want to take a deeper dive and say, what are those projects? Where are they geographically? What types of work are they? Are they bridge? Are they asphalt? Are they concrete? Are they, operational projects? How are we lining these up for mobility? Are we building jobs on top of each other, in different years? So the integrator is going to take all of that information and look at cradle to grave, kind of, if you need to get this done here, here's when you're going to start, here's when the letting, and here's when the award needs to happen. By doing that, we hope, our intent, is that we're gonna have a very balanced program and not get too many eggs in one basket at one time to make it more difficult and less efficient for contractors to bid. So that's the entire intent of this, is to really kind of smooth things out, optimize not only our resources and our partners' resources in the consulting world and the contractors as well. So again, that we can optimize the time needed and the efficiencies for our program. And I believe that was the last slide. Any questions on that?
Right, that's great information. Does the department look at how innovative contracting is performing? How many projects are let design build, and how those are being hewing close to estimate? And
Yeah, I mean, they're lumped into those program slides that I showed you, but I don't know, Ryan's gonna be talking about integrated contracting later, and I'm not sure if that'll be part of what you discuss, Ryan. But it's part of the overall program piece. So I'm not sure as though we look at it specifically and say, you know, here's all the design build jobs and here's how they're performing, but it's more part of the programmatic look at it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Just as one other note, this is not just something Brad and Kristen look at, right? Every month, Brad, Kristen, and I review this with the region engineers. So it's something that is integrated into our business process to constantly monitor what's happening with the bidding process and how we're managing the program. All the things that Brad was talking about in terms of managing mobility and trying to get the right timing on things are things we try to do, but it's kind of in real time. It's kind of 1 year at a time, and so the integrated program support is really to give us a chance to do that on a 5-year program basis and really be ahead of the curve and try to manage cost escalation by having a better set of projects that the industry can bid on effectively and competitively. So this was all the pre-construction stuff. You normally look at our Appendix B piece that Jason presents, which is really about how we manage the contracts once they are in place. And so Jason's going to talk a little bit about some of the other ways that those are managed in other states and give you a sense of kind of where we line up. There's pros and cons to these things. And again, we're not necessarily suggesting any changes here today, just wanted to give you some information on that. So Jason?
Thank you, Tony. Actually, just have a couple slides based on the commission questions that were posed back in July, if I remember correctly. So this drawing, this depiction is a summary of cost escalation clauses in other states across the nation. Now, it's the best data we have based on, I think there was a survey about 2-3 years ago asking states what clauses they have. I actually put out an email about 2 months ago to all of my counterparts in other states, ask for updated information. So this is kind of the best information we have, and as you can tell, there's a lot of cost escalation clauses. Now, it's a mix across the board. A little bit more than half of the states have fuel and or asphalt cost escalation clauses, and that is obviously for asphalt is the binder, which is a petroleum derivative. So it's all the fuel aspects that are kind of key. And then 13 states have steel clauses, and then very few, about 3 if I'm seeing the number correctly, have concrete clauses. Now when we say this, there's a lot of things that go into these clauses when they're done in other states. There's opt-in requirements. Some states require contractors that they don't have a choice. They will be cost escalation clauses on the contract. Other states will allow the contractor to opt in at the time of bidding. There are trigger points as to when the construction clauses will come into play. Based on a study that was about 10 years ago, that varies from 0% to 20%. So it's all across the board. Most of those clauses are triggered from the 5 to 7.5% area. When cost changes that much, then the escalation clauses come into play on contracts. And then there's numerous ways to measure indexes. They have national, regional, local, baseline indexes, so there's varying considerations for how costs are indexed on those construction projects across their area. And then the analysis period is the fourth caveat. Is it analyzed on a monthly basis? Is it analyzed on a yearly basis? Or in some cases, they actually analyze it based on the contract term. So at the end of a contract, they'll actually do an adjustment for the cost escalation during that contract period. So there's a lot of in-depth in the bigger picture, and we just wanted to provide a summary. There's, we're in a group of, I think if I remember right, looking at the screen, it's about a dozen or less states that do not have clauses of any nature. And I remember the commissioner, the chair asking me at the last meeting, typically we have not gone this route because our infrastructure association has not been interested in going this route with cost escalation clauses, because there's a lot of concern on their end. It's all wonderful if all the prices are going up, but as you know, it's either way. And so having a credit come back to the state on those jobs can be a bigger risk than they really wanted to manage. Now, that's all based on historical discussions. All of this and everything I'm mentioning is based on historical discussions. The pandemic and the logistical changes now, everything is just a little bit different, as everyone knows, so there might be some discussions that are commenced now because things have just changed a little bit in the bigger picture of construction, of logistics, of getting materials, supplies, all those aspects. So I don't want the commission to think that industry is concrete against cost escalations. Things have definitely changed, and we're always open to those dialogues. And then this is just a little closer focus on our regional area and what those other states have around us. And then we had our vendor kind of look into cost escalation in other states and 3 similar weather states and what it would impact our projects. And based on, as best they can tell, because there's a lot of data and a lot of analysis you really need to do, and we kind of did it quickly, it would increase the average project by about 0.25%, typically based on historical cost escalation clauses. Now, that's based on a study from 10 years ago. Like I said, things are very unique now, and things would obviously change. Our research with Western is obviously very valuable for us to consider that. But in the bigger picture of a $7 billion program, that is about $17.5 million in additional costs. Doesn't feel like a lot, 0.25, but it can go either way. That's just averaging what's occurred in 3 other states and analyzing 3 similar jobs in our area. So just wanted to provide that kind of background. And then the last thing I had was a summary of our historic Exhibit B of our projects of filing jobs. So we did a data poll, and about 3,600 projects between January 13 and September of 21. That means jobs that were finaled during that period. So they weren't they were closed in the field. They were closed by our contract services division, so all payments were done. And as you can tell, 7.3 billion, 7.4 in final contract value. So it's about 0.71% over that 8-year period of managing costs from as bid to final constructed. And then I looked at the list, and if you take out our top 10 big projects that had substantial changes, that goes all the way down to 0.14, which in all intents purposes is pretty close to delivering the program exactly as was bid in the bigger picture. And I know the commission had kind of asked about that historically. And once again, this is all obviously projects that were finalized in September of 21 were typically probably work in 2020 and before. So some of the additional costs and things could show in future Exhibit B information. But in general, if the pandemic didn't happen, we're on a very trend flat plane of delivering projects for what the bid value was. And so that is the end of my slides, and I'll turn it back over to Tony.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
What are the pros and what are the cons of doing this?
Of doing cost escalation? Well, I would never want to not default to you. One of the cons for us is the administration of cost escalation. As I mentioned with those 4 caveats, we've got to manage those indexes, those special provisions, and all of that data. So administratively, I struggle with that when it might not adjust the contract more than 0.25% either way. I don't know if industry would be interested in that. The pro could be if nationally things shifted and all of a sudden we had a glut of a certain materials and, you know, MDOT would get credit back on that and we could obviously let more work. But that also goes the other way. If we had cost escalation clauses this year, like some states do, there's going to be some significant additional costs that could risk, you know, some projects coming off the system. That's a lot of hypothetical in the bigger picture, though.
It's really a matter of managing risk. We won't get rid of Jason, don't worry. It's an issue of managing risk. The way we manage it is we put that actually on the contractor. So in their bid price, they have to deal with the market fluctuations that will happen over the duration of the project. When there's a cost escalation clause, they potentially could bid a little bit less because it's going to become a shared risk between the department and the contractor. It becomes an administrative issue. It also becomes something when you're used to seeing numbers like that, those numbers will go up because we're building into the process extras and overruns on prices because it's part of the contract. So in the end, we might end up paying a little less because the risk is shared, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in Ryan's presentation. But on the other hand, you know, we may not recoup anything out of that, and it's not at least right now. While industry is talking about a lot of things, they still in Michigan have not really saw it as a favorable thing for them because of the downside. If prices go down, then they get a deduction on their contracts. So.
It looks to me like there's really no pros to it, other than possibly would you get more bidders on these projects?
I
there's
don't know
less
if we get
risk.
more bidders, but
No.
we might get different competition in the bid, right? I mean, they might be able to assess that risk and what their comfort level is on it a little bit differently.
Okay, thank you.
So, Tony or Jason, this slide right here, once again, I think this is fantastic data. Have we benchmarked ourselves against other states, how they are hitting their differential between the bid cost and what it was actually delivered for?
Yes, and thank you for that.
Microphone, please.
I forgot to mention that in my slide. I did, as part of my survey, put out, you know, cost escalation, are you folks doing X and Y, and then do you measure this type of performance? And I got a lot back of, we do, but we don't display it publicly, and I'm not gonna give it to you. And I'm like, okay. There was probably about 10, 11, 12 maybe states that provided it kind of on the down low, you know, because I'm saying I'm not gonna share it publicly, we just are kind of curious. And with that, in my opinion, MDOT is definitely in the higher group of states that perform very close to delivering the project at zero difference between original and contract, and as built. There are several states that I noted are, you know, 4, 5, 6, up to 10% on their letting, because it's not necessarily a performance factor they look at. I don't know, I can't remember which state specifically, if there's unique things and they have weather constraints and other issues, but of about the dozen or so states that provided information, we are definitely in the lead pack of performing that. And that's probably because this has been a measured factor for us based on, you know, the commission and Exhibit B over the years. I believe, that's my personal opinion, but. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So the very last piece of this that we want to talk about is just, this is all predicated on how you manage risk. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't say exactly how prices are ever going to be done. And it's appropriate to share some of that risk with the private sector and the contracting community. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and a little bit how some of the innovative contracting techniques that we use play into that. So Ryan Mitchell is the manager of our innovative contracting section in the Bureau of Development, and he's going to take this next section. Ryan?
Thanks, Tony. Good morning, Commission. Pleasure to be with you. As Tony said, today I'm going to talk a little bit about alternative delivery, or innovative contracting as we call it at the Michigan DOT, and how risk is managed by various delivery models. Material costs, as Jason was talking about, is one of many risks that MDOT analyzes and manages on projects, and one of the ways we manage risk is through the contracting method. We use various project delivery models, and risks are managed differently with each model. As Tony mentioned also, we retain certain risks which are appropriate for the agency to retain, and we may transfer risks and we may share risks with the contracting party. This graphic demonstrates at a high level from traditional MDOT design, contractor construction to the left, all the way to the right to a privately financed, operated, and maintained concession-style project. The delivery models from left to right illustrate transfer of more and more risk to the private party, which comes at a cost, which I'll touch on later. Brief description of delivery models that we utilize at MDOT. The most common is traditional delivery, or design bid build. This is used on the majority of MDOT projects and retains the most common risks to the agency, including design, the schedule of the design, the risk of design errors and omissions, and design-related construction risks. We also utilize something called Construction Manager General Contractor, or CMGC. This is a delivery model that engages a contractor early in the design process to provide risk-related information and input, specifically about constructability, and this allows the owner and the contractor to agree to costs and controls for identified project risks during the development of the project. Another alternative delivery model is called design build. This is when the owner contracts with a single entity to perform design and construction of the project. And design build transfers many risks ordinarily retained by MDOT to a contractor, again comprised of a designer and a contractor. These risks are transferred or often include completing the design from initial design done by MDOT, the design errors and omissions, material quantities, constructability risks, construction means, methods, and the construction schedule. This graphic just illustrates, for your information, states in which transportation design build is authorized legislatively. The next model I'll discuss is called a public-private partnership, or a P3. A P3 transfers the most risk of any of the delivery models, and it may require the developer or contractor to design, build, and/or finance, and/or operate, and/or maintain the project. Usually beyond construction, there's an operations and maintenance term, which may be between 10 and, in some states and some locations, 75 years. Next graphic is just an illustration of where, again, in the United States, public-private partnerships are legislatively authorized for transportation projects. So Tony mentioned a little bit about the reasons why we transfer or share risk. Frequently it has to do with what that will cost the department. Risks that are transferred to a contractor, again, show up in the bid price. So if we have a high confidence in the information related to the risk based on our analysis, and we believe it can be accurately priced by the bidder, then it's a good risk to transfer. However, those risks may be priced differently by different bidders, and MDOT bears a risk of that risk being overpriced in the bid cost. So that may lead to higher bid costs. If, however, we feel that the risk is less quantifiable at the time of bid, it may be appropriate to share that risk. And the way that functions in the contract is we put a cap on the amount or the quantity of the risk that we anticipate occurring on the project. And beyond that, we share that risk with the contractor. So we, as Tony mentioned earlier and Jason alluded to, we take that risk out of the bid, but it may lead to, in the execution of the project, if there's a high quantity of that risk occurring, we have less price certainty, and we'll have overruns. So just to illustrate both risk transfer and risk sharing, I have a project example from a project you may be familiar with. In 2015, MDOT entered into a P3 for updating, modernizing the lighting network on the Detroit metro area freeway network. The contractor updated from high-pressure sodium fixtures on much of the network to LED fixtures, which significantly reduced the cost to operate and maintain those fixtures. Not only do they last longer, they're cheaper to operate, and they need to be replaced less frequently. So in this contract, the contractor was responsible for, in 2 years' time, bringing the lighting up to 98% functional. And if they did not hit that target, payment was withheld from them. So 100% of that risk was borne by the contractor. There was another less controllable risk to the contractor, and that is that of motorists hitting the infrastructure that they replaced. Because that was not quantifiable at the time of the bid, MDOT shares that risk with the contractor. They're currently in the 4th year of a 13-year operating term, and so any given year, a certain number of vehicles are going to run into light poles. The contractor will then respond by replacing those light poles. At a certain threshold, the contractor bears that risk. Beyond that threshold, MDOT provides relief to the contractor. So final slide, I'll touch back to the material cost escalation risk. It's typically, as Jason mentioned, not accounted for in MDOT contracts, and that's because industry in the state of Michigan has not stated a preference to do that. However, if an escalation risk is identified at the time of advertisement and is perceived also by MDOT as a risk, we may create a relief in the contract for that if that risk occurs, subject to terms and limitations. And that is my last slide. I don't want to alarm anyone, but I think this machine's going to restart in about 11 minutes. So.
11 minutes for questions. Any questions on anything, but especially what Ryan talked about?
So what percentage of the MDOT program is in the category of innovative contracting?
Well, it varies year to year, Commissioner, but, and I would say that it also varies by the number of projects or the dollar value, because frequently innovative contracting projects are large. They may have a significant, in a given year, percentage of the overall program, but there are fewer. On average, I've been in this job for about 2.5 years. We have between 5 and 8 design build projects let in a year, and 2 to 3 CMGC projects, fewer P3s. And those projects are selected, as you know, from your background and experience, based on their appropriateness for the delivery models and where those risks can be transferred efficiently. So I'm not evading the question. It's just it does vary significantly. And from a program perspective, from year to year, it might be 5 to 10%, but from a number of contracts, it's much less than that.
So, do you guys see a growing use of innovative contracting, or they're gonna hold steady, or what do you see for the future?
So this is the most frequent question I get, and I always answer it the same way. The trend I've seen is a growing acceptance and frankly, it's a partnership with our contracting and engineering community. They've been very accepting of the delivery models, and they like the delivery models. I think our federal partners have confidence in the delivery models. So I guess I would see, if not a maintenance of the current frequency of their use, a growth of their use.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, if I might, a question I think overall for Tony. I think as one listened to everything we listened to these last number of minutes, you have to be impressed with the discipline and the complexities, but the discipline in which those complexities are managed by MDOT. I think it leaves me with the impression too that there's a lot of comparing with other states, and so the best practices and benchmarking and that kind of thing goes on. So what I'm leading up to is the question, it would be wonderful, would it not, if 10 million people in this state could understand what this discipline and this complexity and how things are managed and the benchmarking that goes on and such. But the representatives of those folks of the legislature, have these presentations been made to the appropriate legislative committees, and do they understand the complexities and discipline and best practices employed in these areas?
I guess that's a good question. We have not done a lot of this. I mean, it tends to be on one topic or another. So we have talked to the House Transportation Commission or Committee on innovative contracting and some of the elements of this. It's a lot, right? It's a very complex process, and they have a lot on their plates. So it's hard to be able to dedicate enough time to get into this level of detail. But I think it's a great suggestion. We need to keep educating the elected leaders that represent our citizens. I appreciate what you said. That was going to be my kind of final hope for the takeaway, is that we are managing and monitoring what's going on with costs and how that impacts our program and how best to manage that. We know there's room for improvement, and we're working on those things, but we are trying to be very effective in doing that, and I'll take your suggestion back. We'll figure out a way with Troy to do a better job of educating our elected leaders.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I have some comments and questions for Tony. Tony, just as a number of years ago, we looked at regions and how fast or how slow we issued permits. This tool that you've now developed with Western Michigan team, which I applaud and do a great job, how can we best use this to look at what's happening in other states to see if they're experiencing trends? Are they having inflation in the same areas that we're having inflation? Are they having more inflation in aggregates? Are they having less inflation in labor? You know, how can we compare it and learn and draw some analysis and look at things like, are they having more single bidders? Or is it just something that's happening in Michigan, and why is it only happening in Michigan? I think that will lead us to to feel better about some of the things that we see when we see aberrations from the usual way that we do business. So I would encourage you and perhaps Jack and the Western Michigan team to dive into that and give us some feedback on that. And then the next point was the question I asked about 40 minutes ago. What are we seeing in trends today? This the data went through 2019, but that was an entirely different time period. That inflation now is running very high. What are we seeing today on inflation? What are we seeing today on single bidders? We really need to, as a matter of policy, look at those things at the commission and say, you know, how can we do better? How can we get more people to bid? What is happening here?
So, and I'll ask, is Brad still in the room, to come up and assist with any of this, but I'll start by, first of all, thank you for the suggestion. We now have the tool by which we can go talk to other states that have similar types of tools. Regarding what we're seeing right now in recent months, we are seeing some unusual cost escalation. Some may be a supply-demand issue as we are pushing more and more of the Rebuilding Michigan program out. But more importantly, I think it's the rather unusual supply chain issues that we're seeing across the country, although it's affecting people differently depending on where you are in the country. So there have been discussions we've been having with industry about different materials shortages, epoxy-based materials, paint. There's kind of a pinch in steel fabrication right now, and so we're beginning to see that reflect itself in the bid prices. And you're right, it's the tool that we have in the construction cost index is a look back, and so it's a little bit hard to do that in real time. I don't know, Brad, do you have additional insight into what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, you kind of hit the highlights there, Tony, but I will tell you that our cost estimates are based on average historical unit-based prices, right? So we have huge databases of all the pay items, of all the projects that have been let. So when we do an estimate, that's what it's based on. And there's algorithms behind those numbers that take into account the geography, what region, location it's in, the type of work that it is, you know, the amount of work and quantities. And that's what provides us the estimate that's used at the time of advertising. That's not from 2019, 2018. That's only about 2 months lag. So it is historical based, but it's not, you know, 2 years ago based. It's based on 2 years worth of data from 2 months ago to 2 years before that. So it is a bit of a chase. It's not completely 2 years behind, but we are continually updating those based on the bids that are coming in. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. By way of example, this body authorized the issuance of the Rebuild Michigan bonds. And at the time, we heard little whispers of beware inflation, that this will lead to higher prices. I want to make sure that we are able to bring those projects that we designated for Rebuild Michigan in as close to budget as possible so that we don't have people saying to us, we told you so.
Right. So, Director, do you want to?
Mr. Chair, I have a slide in my presentation that would address the issue you just brought up. And we've been very, very careful of that exact point you made, because we know at the end of this, we're going to be held accountable.
That's right.
To show how we spent that money. So I have a slide in my presentation too.
I appreciate that, because when we go to issue more bonds, we'll have that, you know, gotcha coming at us if we weren't careful. But under your leadership, I'm sure we are careful.
The only other thing I would add to that is there are a lot of unusual things coming out of the pandemic, right, that are affecting us and other supply chain issues. So I'd be careful about long-term changes in practice for kind of short-term things until we see how stuff stabilizes. We are watching it very carefully. I'm not saying we aren't. We are paying very careful attention because we have the same concern, right? And that's why the integrated program support and program management is one of the tools that we wanted in our toolbox, is what other things can we do in terms of the sequencing of projects and timing of things to help mitigate against some of those other factors. So, again, we appreciate your time. I know this was a long presentation, a lot of material, but we know it's a topic of primary interest for you right now. So,
Best presentation I can remember in 10 years of being here.
very good. Thank you to the MDOT team and Dr. Liu for all your efforts. Appreciate it.
Thank you again. Well, we're going to break in here and have the director give his report.
All right. Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone. Truly glad to be here to present my Director's update for this month. But before I start, I'd like to introduce somebody in addition to our team in the executive unit, Patsy Handy. Patsy, can you please stand up and raise your hand? Patsy replaced Deb Wedley, who retired about a year and a half ago, so I thought it'd be nice for her to stop by and say hello. So I'm going to focus my presentation on two topics today. The first one is our new Chief Culture, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and then the one that's near and dear to your heart, the Rebuilding Michigan program update. So the first one, as you remember, I believe it was our June-July meeting, I mentioned to you that MDOT is looking for a Chief Culture Equity Officer to help us address equity and inclusion issue, not just internally but also externally, because we obviously, we put out a lot of contracts. We felt it's important that we also address the external issue. So after about 6 months search, we came up with a great candidate who's since started. Her name is Terry Slaughter. Terry started, I believe, late August, and we've intentionally not put her out there to start drinking from a fire hose because she's coming from outside, not from state government. We felt it'd be best that we let her understand the culture of MDOT and state government, and then the plan, we're beginning to start having her attend meetings externally as well. But she's doing a great job learning everything that MDOT does and how she could be helpful. And I remember in my report to you last time, we intentionally decided to elevate this position to the Chief Director, Deputy Director position, because we felt that we really wanted to use this position to make an impact, and again, internally and externally. We did not want to make it a lower level position, and we think this is the right position. That's the right level for this position if we're really going to make a long-lasting impact in the way we do business. So the bureaus that reports to this position is Bureau of Transportation Planning. We believe everything, again, if you look at some of the numbers Jason and everybody shared with Brad shared with you, everything to get to a 0.71% bid and project closeout starts with planning, scoping, design. There's sequence of things that has to be done right to get to a number like that. So planning, we do a lot of planning that affects communities. Decisions that we make during planning, we feel is important that we have equity and inclusion component to that, where we engage the community, make sure that everybody has a voice in whatever we do. So planning is a critical part of that. The next part is the organizational. Something is blocking this here. If you can, turn. You take that off. Okay, there you go. All right, Office of Organizational Development. This is an office that we created last year that focuses mostly on internal hiring practices and the training and getting employee retention, all that. So again, the internal focus is a piece of that. Office of Business Development, that's the office that deals with DBE, small business programs. Again, that we believe that there has to be some equity piece to that. Equal employment opportunity, that speaks for itself. And Office of Economic Development. So these are the areas that we kind of carved out from each of our direct reports and put under this new Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, direct supervisor. So everything, again, her transition is going well, and the entire MDOT team has been very, very supportive and welcoming her and trying to make her feel a part of the family. So I want to talk a little about our Rebuilding Michigan program. As you can see there, 2021, we had about $1.7 billion. 2022, it's going to be $2.4 billion. But as I mentioned in my last presentation, my worry is that once we get to 24 and beyond, the numbers go way down because the Rebuilding Michigan money is going to be all spent by then. There is a lapse there in 2024 and 25. That's because that $97 million you see there for what's left of the Rebuilding Michigan money, it was supposed to, that project was supposed to be in 2024, but because of some issues, that project is going to be delayed and that money will be spent in 25. But the point is that after 2023, we need to start talking about what is the long-term funding for our transportation system going to look like. There's going to be a very precipitous drop in our program. Kind of give you a quick round-robin update all over the state on how a lot of these projects are going. This slide here, as I mentioned at our last meeting, I'm particularly proud of because it shows that if you look at engineers' estimate compared to the letting numbers, they almost equal. We're at about 1.08% difference. Tony's right, things may change, or things are changing, but I wanted to assure you that we are taking this very seriously. We're looking at the inflation numbers. We're not just approving any projects, even if the numbers come in way high. We look at them, we talk about them. There are things we could have done differently. Maybe we need to rebid the project if need be. So we don't feel the pressure to just approve any project or bring it forward to you. So if you're not seeing a lot of projects that are coming in high, it's because we internally try to make sure that whatever we bring forward to you is the right thing. We've looked at all the angles. And I will tell you, the industry has been very helpful too. The I-69 project you see there that came in, where is that? Yes, I-69 Bay, Fenton Road to M54 that came in higher than engineers estimate. we spoke to the industry. And what we found out is that, yes, some of the restrictions we put in that project was too much for them to be able to work and finish that project on time. We put a lot of restriction on lane closure. Well, you can only walk between this hour and that hour. All that adds to cost, and that was something we did not factor into our estimate. So overall, I believe that these numbers reflect that despite our program double, we didn't have much staff to go with the program. Things are still being done relatively well. All the MDOT employees, from the project design managers and the construction oversight folks, and quite frankly, even our contract folks are doing an outstanding job getting these projects out and making sure that we keep things going. So again, I wanted to share this with you to let you know that we are monitoring it very closely. We've seen some high prices in asphalt numbers because gas prices gone up. Asphalt used to be like $70 a ton. Now we're seeing it at maybe $80, $90, and that would happen. So inflation is a big concern, and we're monitoring it very closely. So as I said, I'm just going to go quickly through several of throughout the entire state, all the regions, highlight a few of the projects we're doing out there, and kind of talk a little bit about how they're coming along. Bay Region, this is the I-69 project, the one I mentioned from M54. This project is currently being said to be completed October of next year, 2022. It's about $100 million. Prime contractor is Dance Excavating. The project's going well. Hopefully, again, by next year, the project will be completed. Next one is I-69 from Fenton Road to M54 Dot Highway. Again, this is a project that, it's part of the first project I showed. But what I really want to highlight is the number of jobs that these Rebuilding Michigan projects are creating. This is 1,270 jobs that this project is supporting that would otherwise probably not be there if not for the Rebuilding Michigan program. So that to me it's a good thing to highlight. This is I-69 from Cox, Dottie Drain to M19. It's an Ajax project, $37 million low bid. Engineer's estimate was $46 million. I mean, take a look at this, the cost savings there. I would imagine by the time this project is gone, it would never get anywhere close to that engineer's estimate. So there is still competition out there. We again, not just approving projects because we feel desperate that we got to get them out and complete them. So this is a good thing. Lapeer County, I-69 from M24 to Lake George. Contractor is Toby. The low bid was $54.5 million. Engineer's estimate is $56 million. Again, that's a good thing. It's cost savings. I'm going to go on to Superior Region right quick. This is Chippewa County, I-75. Cost is $9.1 million, but again, for Superior Region, it's a very important part of the state. That project is going on well. We hope that, I believe it's winding down right now as we speak. So hopefully the project will be buttoned up by the end of this year. Number of jobs this project is supporting, right there. Again, in Superior Region, we may say, well, $9.1 million is a small job. For us, in the Lower Peninsula, yes, but again, up there, it's just as important. Mackinac County, also in Superior Region, it's a mill and field job, 2.65 miles from the Cotter River to Watt Road, an approximate $2.5 million investment, creating about 29 jobs. That's what we're seeing with what Rebuilding Michigan is doing. I'm going to move on to Southwest Region right quick. Berrien County, US 31, I-94 interchange. Cost of this project is $121 million. Estimated completion is 2023. It's about 60% complete right now, but again, 1,200 jobs that this project is supporting in that area. So, North Region, Kalkaska County, M72. It's a $13 million investment in the project. Is wrapping up right now. It's rebuilding nearly 17 miles of M72. This is the project profile. Again, 165 jobs that this project is supporting in that area. Benzie County, US 31, $7 million investment, supports about 89 jobs. And this is all the project profile. Grand Traverse and Kalkaska County, US 131, $4.6 million project, supports about 56 jobs. The project is wrapped up. Grand Region. Allegan County, I-196 westbound from 138th Avenue to US 31. As you can see, total cost is $33 million. It's started in March, and it's slated to be completed by the end of this month. That's the project profile. Supports about 430 jobs in that region. Metro Region, I think I highlighted this project last time we met. This is I-275. This is a project that is so well deserving. It's that whole corridor, again, as I mentioned at the last meeting, this was just going to be a patch job. We were only going to spend $50 million there just to hold the job together. But when you all approved the $3.5 billion bond, we pulled it back and regrouped, redesigned it to do a total reconstruction, because the governor's focus was, let's rebuild projects that would not otherwise have money to rebuild, instead of doing patchwork. A project like this, spending about $256 million to reconstruct that, that's over a 30-year life we're going to get out of that pavement, and that's a good investment. So again, that project is slated to be completed in 2024. It's a very, very big project, and a very aggressive schedule as well. It's the project profile, $270 million. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, if I go back to that slide where the contractor bid $256 million, our engineer's estimate was $270 million. So about almost $20+ million difference between our engineer's estimate and the contractor's low bid, which is good, meaning we're doing something right, and there's competition out there. This project, again, supports about 3,500 jobs in local economy. I-96 Flex Route, if you've ever driven US 23 between Ann Arbor and Brighton, we put our very first one out there, and it's been very well received. I was telling somebody the other day, before we deployed that project, the public approval of that project was at like 13–15%. But we felt this was the right project for that corridor. And since then, we've seen approval of that project gone over 60%, almost 70%, because the public really see the value in doing a project like that way. Saved a lot of money, and it addressed the issue that needed to be addressed in that corridor, which is congestion. It's a peak hour issue where in the morning, people going into Ann Arbor, there's a backup, and then when they're coming out in the evening, the same thing. So there was no need to put a 3-lane and wide shoulders out there and spend about $400 million. I think it was estimated about close to that, And we end up spending about $120 million just to widen the shoulder and put these gantries up there where you can only use that wide shoulder during daytime, during the peak hour period. And it worked out great. So we didn't need to create a 24-hour solution for a 6-hour problem. So I-96 corridor is another just similar traffic pattern like what you see on US 23. So we are going to put the next one on this corridor between 275 and Kensington Road. The project, I believe, is slated to be let this December. So looking forward to the next flex route in the state. Again, this just kind of showing you some of the gantries that will be placed up there. The difference in this one compared to the US 23 is that the shoulder's already there, but it's not being used right now. We're just going to take out the existing shoulder, beef it back up, take out all the rumble strips there, and put all these gantries up and do some work out there. So it's going to be an exciting project that I think that corridor needs really badly. I'm going to move on to University Region right quick and talk about the I-94 project. If you've driven through Jackson lately, you'll see there's a great transformation going on out there. There's a lot of work going on in Jackson, and that corridor really needs it badly. So construction cost of this one is about $117 million. 3.5 miles of pavement repair, total reconstruction of the interchange at Airport Road and M Road. We're going to put a divergent diamond interchange at the West Avenue I-94 interchange, which is a major interchange into and out of town in Jackson. This is a project profile. It supports about 1,500 jobs, and I think it's a good thing. So with that, I will open it up for any questions you may have.
Any questions or comments for the director?
I just wanted to make a comment on your new equity selection. Once again, seeing some of the things that are happening nationally, I applaud you guys for recognizing that this is an issue that is going to be playing out into the future. So I applaud you guys for that selection.
Thank you, sir.
I think we all echo that sentiment, and well put, Greg. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Director. It's always nice having you with us.
Thank you, sir.
We will go on to the final Michigan Mobility 2045 plan, and Bradley Charlotte.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be back here in front of you this morning to announce the completion of our State Long Range Plan Michigan Mobility 2045. So this morning I want to share with you what we've done since we talked to you back in July. So we're going to cover what was discussed in the public comment period, what changes we made to the document between the draft plan and the final. We'll highlight the executive summary, which was asked about when we were here in July, and then talk about plan implementation and next steps. So we started our public comment period immediately after the commission meeting in July and held that through the end of August. Overall, we had about 1,200 website views, and this just shows the stats overall of what we saw. We had 2 public meetings with 105 participants virtually, and 2 stakeholder meetings with 35 attendees. But I also want to highlight with the stakeholders, we also went to several conferences and specific meetings that were held with the stakeholders to get their buy-in through this process. In terms of what we heard from the public and stakeholders, overall, 67 sets of comments, including some very extensive letters. Passenger rail, and rail was the most heavily commented item in the public comment period in terms of wanting more passenger rail either connecting urbanized areas together or going up north, as well as commuter rail within urbanized areas. And then active transportation, maintaining, repairing roads. Climate change was a big topic that was discussed, and we'll talk about that. Freight infrastructure, tribal government needs, transportation system access for those with disabilities, and maritime transportation needs were all specific topics that were covered in our letters. So in terms of what we did to make accommodations on those comments and to make sure the plan was up to speed was, first of all, the biggest thing was making sure clarification edits were made. There was, in putting together the plan and trying to get it condensed, sometimes there were a few areas where we needed to be a little bit clearer. And so, for example, highlighting what the plan covered versus what was not in the plan. For example, highlighting that the plan covers all federal aid eligible roads and not every street in the state of Michigan, such as neighborhoods. That was something we needed to make sure people understood. And then also clarifications on what types of transit service by county was available was another piece. Also, linking to other parallel efforts was a key thing that we wanted to make sure we highlighted as well. So the County Road Association had their own investment plan, which went into deeper details on their needs, and so we referenced that, as well as the Michigan Council on Climate Solutions efforts that are currently underway, and we're expecting to see some findings there on recommendations in the next month or so. And then also Governor Whitmer's goal to be carbon neutral by 2050 was something we added in our discussion on climate change. A couple of additions on the needs section that was added was information and working with the County Road Association to get their maintenance costs on their primary road system. And so we added that into our analysis, as well as the recommendations to add more detail in terms of the highway pump station needs for maintenance and replacement overall as a factor into the resiliency of our system. And then finally, the economic benefit analysis was still underway when the draft plan was put together, so all those findings have been included in the final document. So in terms of what we did for climate change, we really emphasized in 3 areas where climate change is a factor, and you'll see that within the plan. Under the roles and purpose, Chapter 1, you'll see more discussion on that. The trends in Chapter 2, and also impacts in community, environment, and health in Chapter 7 of the plan will have call-outs for climate change. As we mentioned, references to those other parallel efforts, as well as relationship to resiliency, were all covered in there. And then we added a new chapter on plan implementation, which we'll talk about. And really here it's to discuss that it's the intent to keep this plan current as new legislation, data, and efforts come about. And then there was some updates based on comments we received for the rail supplement. And then the rest of these things were just cosmetic edits in terms of modifications to tables and charts to add more clarity, footnotes or things like that. The addition of our letters from the governor and our director here were added, and then results from our public and stakeholder outreach. And so and then our final active transportation plan and statewide transit strategy have been included as well. And so one of the things to highlight too is the executive summary. I know that was one thing that was asked about at our meeting in July, and so I hope you guys have had a chance to look at that. What this does is cover highlights and key takeaways and key points. This will serve as the main face of the plan for the general public to read. It really tells the what. And the what is in this plan, what is this plan, and what are the results and key findings. If you want to get into the how and the methodology, that it serves as that movie trailer so that folks can then, if they want to get more into the weeds, that's what the main plan document will share. So hopefully for those who read the executive summary, it will serve as that movie trailer and that teaser to get them to look at the larger document for those curious minds. Want to also highlight the whole next steps for plan implementation. So as we know, developing a plan is quite a bit of work, and we spent quite a bit of time putting that together, but now we actually need to implement that plan and integrate that into our processes. And so what we've been doing over the last couple of months here, as the plan's been finalized, is our MDOT team has been working with our consultants to come up with taking those strategies that were developed as part of MM 2045 and develop specific actions that we can do in the short term, midterm, and long term. And so right now we did a survey of subject matter experts across the department to look at these suggested actions, and then based on those responses have met with each of the areas of the department internally to discuss those actions more and to get feedback. And right now we've done that first round of review and are currently in the process of revisiting those based on the comments we received within the department, and then going to come back with a revised list, which we will bring to our leadership team before the end of the calendar year. And then from there, that is what MDOT's looking at in the initial stages on how we can implement by taking those strategies and turning into actions. On the stakeholder side, we want to continue to work with them, and so as we mentioned long ago, this was a state of Michigan long-range plan, not just an MDOT plan, so we'd like to provide assistance and guide them as they look to develop their own actions on how they're going to implement this plan. And we will keep emphasizing the role of partnerships and how to work together. And we want to also, based on the recommendations and what we've heard, continue the involvement of our stakeholder group, which has been through here. And then in our final stakeholder meeting, we asked them final meeting before the development and adoption of the plan. We asked them 3 questions, and it was a clear indication of how they felt through this. And so the first question we asked them was, how do they feel that our efforts from the MM 2045 team was to involve them as stakeholders? And you'll see the results here that over 90% either said excellent or good, with over half of them saying excellent in terms of our efforts to involve them. We turned the other way to ask them how do they feel their efforts were to be involved. It was still pretty good, good being the highest one, but also a lot of excellent and fair. But you'll notice on both of these, nobody put poor under either one of those questions. And so it's very encouraging to see from our stakeholders their thoughts overall and being involved in this process. And so the final question we asked them was, would they be interested in continuing to be engaged in this process as we move into plan implementation? And then the results speak for themselves, that 88% of our respondents say yes, they definitely want to stay involved in this process and to continue working together in the plan implementation. And so with that, our schedule here, as we see, depending on what comes out of here today, we'll look to, if this is adopted today, we'll look to submit the plan to our federal agencies over the next few weeks and continue forward with plan implementation. And just to kind of remind everyone, the plan includes the executive summary, the main plan document, and then for reference, we have all of the supplemental reports, which include the rail plan supplement, the public and stakeholder outreach process report, our system performance report, our strategic multimodal corridors report, our executive summary for the active transportation plan, and our statewide transit strategy, and our federal compliance matrices. So all of this is entailed within MM 2045. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? I'd entertain a motion.
I would make that motion, Mr. Chair. It's an impressive piece of work, and I think it deserves the commission's support.
Second?
I'll second.
All right, I know we're gonna have an abstention, so I will ask any abstentions up front. Abstaining. All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. All right, we're on to the 5-year transportation plan.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Director, everyone. My name is Michael Case. I'm the 5-year Transportation Program Specialist in MDOT's Bureau of Transportation Planning. And I'm going to present to you the final 5-year transportation program for fiscal years 2022 to 2026. As noted on your agendas, this is an action item seeking your approval to finalize the program and plan for submission to the Michigan Legislature by March 1st, 2022, as required by state statute. So jumping into the numbers here, MDOT is anticipating a $15.2 billion investment over the next 5 years, covering both the highway and multimodal programs. These numbers are consistent with what was presented to you in July, other than a slight increase in the highway program from 12.2 to 12.3 billion, primarily due to projects that were originally scheduled to be obligated in fiscal year 21 that were unable to do so due to either budgetary constraints or some kind of issue with project development, such as a scope change or a delay in getting environmental clearance. Before I move on to this slide, just to mention with the previous slide, a list of those projects that were unable to move forward in fiscal year 21, as has been done in years past, will be provided to you in the very short future. So looking at the $12.3 billion highway program close up, we see $8.6 billion dedicated to repairing and rebuilding roads and bridges. That includes pre-construction activities, including scope development, right-of-way acquisition, and so on. We're looking at $2.3 billion in routine maintenance for things like filling potholes, landscaping, and sweeping. Safety and system operations, $972 million. So pavement markings, signage, things that increase the efficiency and safety of our transportation system, and $456 million for additional state and federally funded programs, which include things like the Carpool Parking Lots Program and the Transportation Alternatives Program, otherwise known as TAP. You heard the director talk about the Rebuilding Michigan program and its impacts on the highway program. So out of the $12.3 billion investment we're expecting over the next 5 years, $2.3 billion of that is anticipated to be bond finance projects, with $1.4 billion in fiscal year 2022, $774 million in fiscal year 23, and $97 million in fiscal year 25. Not shown on this chart is numbers that have been obligated already in fiscal year 20 at $409 million and $749 million in fiscal year 21. Looking at the multimodal program over the next 5 years, as I mentioned already, these numbers are consistent with what was already brought to you in July. We're looking at $2.3 billion in the public transportation program and $601 million in the aviation program. So that wraps up the financial side of things. I did want to touch briefly on some of the key themes that we highlighted in this year's program and the ever-increasing importance of telling the story to successful project and program implementation. The director's executive team selected 3 focus areas in that context for this year's program, including equity and inclusion, transportation resiliency, and bicycle and pedestrian improvements in conjunction with MDOT's Complete Streets program. As shown here with the US 12 rebuilding project in Metro region, where one or more of those elements applied to a project, a small icon was placed by the route or the project name. And the idea with that is to help close the gap in the public's minds between establishing the long-term vision for a better and world-class transportation system in Michigan with the projects that are being selected moving forward for construction. We'd like to continue to build on this idea in future 5-year transportation programs. You heard Brad talk about those short, medium, and long-term strategies for attaining that long-term vision. So we're going to start discussing with the long-range planning team about how to connect that with showing what projects are moving forward in each 5-year program. So wrapping up, we held our public comment period from July 26th to August 27th and received 191 comments from 187 different individuals. We provided 209 responses to those comments in coordination with the TSC and region in which the project, if it was project related. That number is bigger. Some people had some additional questions after their initial comment. So that's why 191 versus 209. We worked with the Office of Communications as well to make the public aware of the opportunity to provide comments, and we're able to track through social media the general awareness and establishing, how well we're getting out there. We were able to reach 120,000 people in just the public comment period, expressed here as impressions. Of those 120,000 people, almost 3,000 engaged with us in some way over social media in the form of likes, shares, comments, retweets, or so on, depending on the platform that was being used. We also saw about 5,700 visits to the 5YTP page and the Michigan Transportation Program portal page as well, which is where the map of projects and the actual comment forms were located for the 5YTP. We had 437 downloads of the document as well. Across comments, we did see some themes emerge. You see in the table on the right, we've outlined some of those. The top concern of comments received were safety or other concerns with a current or proposed road or bridge design. Specifically, there was one in the North region, a roundabout that's in the planning phase right now that a lot of the public was concerned about going in. The need for more transit and multimodal infrastructure statewide. There was concern over poor pavement conditions, specifically on local roads, as well as support for right-sizing infrastructure and or implementing roundabouts at certain intersections around the state. Last thing I'll mention regarding this, it wasn't the biggest comment, but I really liked to see this come back from the public. They were concerned about equity and resiliency and MDOT communicating how those things are being considered in the implementation of projects and programs, specifically through performance measures. So with that, we are seeking your approval of the final document in the program to finalize it and submit it to the legislature, as I mentioned, by March 1st of 2022, which we are again required to do by state statute.
Any questions or comments? I'll take a motion. Second?
Support.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed or abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amy, take us home.
Good morning, Director, Commissioners. Thank you for having me. I am Amy Matisoff, the Tribal Liaison for the Department of Transportation, and I am here today just to update you on the tribal affairs that have taken place over the last year within the department. First, I would just like to recognize that November is Native American Indian Awareness Month. With that, MDOT honors the histories, culture, and contributions of American citizens whose ancestors had lived in North America for hundreds of years. MDOT recognizes the importance of inclusion and the achievements of Native American employees, as well as Native American trailblazers in transportation.
Today, there are 12 federally recognized sovereign tribal governments within the Michigan's geographic boundaries. The tribes in Michigan are the Anishinaabe people, known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa. The 12 federally recognized Native American tribes in the state of Michigan have evolved from 3 indigenous political entities, as I just noted, that occupied Michigan at the beginning of written history. So here is a map that shows the government office locations of the 12 sovereign tribal governments. The sovereign tribal governments are each recognized individually by Congress and are politically independent from one another, although tribal citizens may share important historical and cultural connections. So we do have tribal citizens that spread all the way across the state of Michigan, regardless of location of their government office. I would like to briefly go into the Foundation on Tribal Relations and Tribal Consultation that brings me here to see you today. So we have several federal laws that require us to provide tribal consultation, starting with the U.S. Constitution and several other acts you see listed here. FHWA has supervening authority over the states to monitor the extent that federally funded state transportation planning and development projects may negatively impact tribal environmental justice rights or may disturb land areas where tribal ancestral burials or other culturally significant artifacts may exist. By agreement with FHWA and MDOT, responsibility for project oversight and compliance with federal law for state transportation projects is delegated to MDOT. On the state side, we have a tribal accord that serves as acknowledgement by the state for each of the tribe's sovereignty and right to self-governance and self-determination. And it is a commitment by the state to use a process of consultation with the tribes to minimize and avoid disturbances or disputes. Additionally, there are several executive directives that have taken place that led to the MDOT policy that I brought before you last year for approval that was updated in July of 2020. These policy documents reaffirm, implement, formalize, and extend the commitments made by the state of Michigan in the accord I just mentioned. So here's a picture of the governor and lieutenant governor with all of the tribal leaders that were present this year at the State Tribal Summit, and the memo you have in your packet was presented to the governor at that time. Additionally, MDOT, here I would like to talk about the consultative highlights that we've taken place. MDOT is in the process of updating our programmatic agreement for Section 106 as part of that process. We are working with tribes within the state of Michigan as well as outside of the state of Michigan, and that brings us back to that commitment we've made to FHWA as far as coordination and consultation with the tribes. The department also revised their annual safety plan call for projects letter to more clearly identify the ability for tribal governments to submit applications for funding in the State Highway Safety Improvement Program. MDOT staff coordinated with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community to ensure that an MDOT road project did not interfere with the tribal water walking ceremony that was taking place. Executive staff participated in the 2021 State Tribal Summit held in September 30th, 2021, and that's a requirement of the executive directive. And as Brad had mentioned, MDOT staff continue to engage Michigan tribal nations in the 2045 transportation plan. So these are just a few highlights of consultation processes and conversations that we've taken place out of central office or some of those areas in our environmental section. And now I will highlight our region and TSC accomplishments on the tribal front. The department is continuing coordination with the Bay Mills Indian community on an alternative access permit for development along M28 just west of I-75. The Traverse City TSC is partnering with the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians to design and construct a roundabout at the intersection of US 31 and M22. The Grand Region and the Grand Rapids TSC staff worked extensively with the Gun Lake Tribe, FHWA, and Bureau of Indian Affairs to complete design plans, address environmental issues, and resolve right-of-way impacts for the interchange improvements at US 131 and M 179 near the Gun Lake Casino. Just a point to mention, at the State Tribal Summit, the Gun Lake Tribe gave MDOT compliments in working with our region staff and TSC on how well that project is going, which was very nice to hear. The Bay region continues its quarterly meetings with tribal officials in 2021 going forward, covering a variety of road improvement projects and traffic management issues that could occur within the region. Lastly, MDOT continues the Rebuild Michigan initiative by modernizing, developing the infrastructure needed to effectively connect our communities and continue economic growth statewide by consulting, coordinating, and partnering with our 12 federally recognized tribal nations. Looking into 2022, our plan, hopefully, fingers crossed, is that we will be able to hold the Michigan Interdepartmental Transportation Meeting in the fall of 2022 in person. We postponed that due to COVID and would really like to jump back into planning that here in the near future. As I noted, MDOT's Environmental Services section and tribal liaisons are working on updating the programmatic agreement for Section 106. And in that process, we are hoping to integrate a tribal form into the...
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, could I just interject for just a second? I
course.
should have done it back at the very, very beginning when we talked about the schedule for next year. I'd like to recommend that we consider next spring, but probably preferably next summer, that the commission meet in Detroit so that we can do a kind of a postponed tour of the Gordie Howe International Bridge and see the progress. We were going to do that, and then COVID hit. So I'd really like to, by next summer, well, there's already a tremendous amount of progress being made, and I think by next summer there'll be a ton more, so many tons more, I should say. And so I would invite the commission to meet in Detroit.
I think that'd be an excellent idea if Troy, you would make note of that. And also, maybe this year we could do a tour of Detroit City Airport and Detroit Metro Airport, maybe behind the scenes. I know we're spending money on the runway there, and Detroit City's brought up a lot, so maybe 2 different meetings we can be in Detroit. Anybody else have any final Yep, Greg.
Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, 30 seconds, I'd just like to recognize one of our key partners in the industry is retiring. Glenn Bukowski is retiring from MITA, and Glenn has spent over 40 years in this industry, coming close to 50, and actually he started his career with MDOT and spent 30 years, but he has been a stalwart